There is a moment during the opening song of the opening night of Rush's 50-something tour that nobody who was at the Kia Forum on June 7, 2026 will ever forget. It was not a perfect moment. In fact, it started as a disaster. During the complex churning introduction to Xanadu, a song chosen deliberately by the band to open their first show in 11 years because it was, in Lee's words, the most dangerous stunt they could open with, Anika Nilles fumbled. She dropped a drumstick. On the most scrutinized debut performance in modern rock history, playing in front of 15,000 Rush fans who had waited years for this night and arrived with their critical instincts at full alert, the new drummer dropped a stick during the first song. And in milliseconds, before anyone watching could fully process what had happened, she had grabbed the replacement stick she keeps mounted on the kit for exactly this scenario, completed the fill she had started, and kept going. Not a beat missed, not a moment lost. The fill landed exactly where it was supposed to land. The arena erupted, not with the nervous, measured approval of a crowd deciding whether to accept something, with the roaring, full-throated approval of 15,000 people who had just watched someone handle an impossible situation with the instinct and grace of a professional at the absolute peak of their powers, and had decided in that single moment that whatever questions they'd arrived with were answered. That stick drop and the millisecond recovery that followed is in some ways the perfect summary of everything Anika Nilles did on opening night. Everything went right because she knew exactly how to handle the moment something went wrong. Before we break down what happened on that stage song by song, we need to spend a moment with what she was walking into. Rush's last show before June 7, 2026 was on August 1, 2015 in the same building. The Kia Forum, then known as the Forum in Inglewood, California. That show was the closing night of the R40 tour, Rush's 40th anniversary run, and it turned out to be the last time Peart ever played drums with Geddy Lee and Lifeson. Peart had stepped to the front of the stage that night, something he almost never did, and stood shoulder to shoulder with Lee and Lifeson for a final bow. Lee told the crowd, "I do hope we meet again sometime." They did not meet again. Peart died in January 2020, and for 6 years after that, the Forum stage had sat there as the literal location of Rush's last moment as a trio. When Rush returned to that exact building on June 7, 2026, and Anika Nilles took her seat behind a kit that held a set of Peart's own drumsticks, resting on her stage riser, a deliberate tribute placed there by the band so that his presence would be physically felt in the space. The weight of everything that had happened in between those two nights was in the room with everyone. This is what she walked into. Not just a concert, an act of memory, of grief, and of continuation, all happening simultaneously. Rush had never opened a show with Xanadu before. It is not an easy choice to open with. The 1977 track from the album A Farewell to Kings is 11 minutes long. It opens with an extended atmospheric section built on complex percussion and texture before the full band enters. It requires Lee to play a double-neck bass guitar, a notoriously demanding physical instrument, and its drum parts are, from the very first note, among the more complex in the Rush catalog. One critic described it as akin to kicking off a trick show with the most dangerous stunt. That was exactly the point. Rush did not come back to play it safe. And here is what makes the stick drop moment even more loaded than it might seem in isolation. Xanadu was the song opening the show specifically because of what it demands. By choosing it first, Rush was making a statement that Nilles could handle anything in the catalog from the very first note. The stick drop was not a failure of preparation. It was a random, unforeseeable moment of physical chaos in the middle of one of the most technically demanding opening sequences imaginable. What she did in response, the millisecond recovery, the fill completed, the beat never lost, was not something you can rehearse for. You can have spare sticks mounted, you can train your muscle memory, but the actual act of dropping a stick and not breaking stride in front of 15,000 people in the highest pressure moment of your career is something that only happens because the music lives in your body at a level deeper than thought. The arena's roar when they understood what had just happened was, by every account, one of the loudest moments of the entire night. Not because she had been perfect, because she had been real and human, and then immediately extraordinary. Rolling Stone's reviewer called her performance of Xanadu's intro simply nailed down to the last 30-second note. The stick drop didn't make it into that sentence because in the context of the full performance, it was a detail. It was one moment in a 2.5-hour demonstration, but it was the moment the night turned. After Xanadu, the first set of the night built into something that stopped feeling like an audition and started feeling like a concert. Limelight, last performed in 2013, came second. Then Far Cry, during which Lee and Lifeson formally introduced the touring band members, then Subdivisions, then Free Will, which hadn't been played since 2011, during which Lee took on the song's stratospheric final verse, and Lifeson opened up its solo with what reviewers called a cosmic shred approach. A Neil Peart tribute collage then played on the screens, extended, featuring Peart's own voice from prior interviews, speaking about drumming as an instrument of self-esteem, and describing himself as a living paradox of order and chaos, planning and spontaneity, presence and restlessness. The clips of him playing that accompanied the voiceover were, in the words of one reviewer, a powerful visual reminder of his ferocity behind the kit. Then the music resumed. Bravado, dedicated explicitly to Peart's memory, Caravan, and then the first set closed with La Villa Strangiato. La Villa Strangiato is, in the Rush catalog, roughly the equivalent of a final exam that all other drumming exams are graded by. It is a 9-minute instrumental that spans jazz, classical, and hard rock, demanding constant shifts in feel and texture with no warning and no margin for imprecision. Nilles, whose entire professional background is rooted in jazz fusion drumming that values exactly that kind of rapid tonal and rhythmic switching, was in some ways more prepared for La Villa Strangiato than for any other song in the set. Rolling Stone said she nailed everything in it, down to every tricky little ultra-syncopated bit. The Variety reviewer, writing from the position of someone newly converted to Rush, called her performance of the song proof that her Jeff Beck background had made her uniquely qualified for the gig. The same jazz fusion vocabulary that had won her the first night of that European tour years earlier was now serving Rush on the stage of the Kia Forum. Set 2 opened with 2112, specifically parts 1, 2, and 7 of the album's side-length suite. The usual audience call and response chants landed perfectly. Nilles had a particularly explosive short feature sequence during the 2112 Part 7 finale that reviewers described as bringing the crowd to a loud frenzy. And then came the moment that may define this entire tour as much as any individual performance. Time stands still. I'm a Man, who sang the original 1987 guest vocal, walked out unannounced. She performed the part she had recorded 39 years earlier, live, in a room full of people who understood every layer of what it meant. The band had framed her appearance as a tribute to Neil Peart. The song's title, for one reviewer, could have been the motto for the night. Man pecked Lee on the cheek as the song ended. The crowd understood everything. YYZ, Peart's traditional showpiece, the instrumental that had been the centerpiece of his legendary live drum solos for decades, was played in its entirety, note perfect. But there was no drum solo. The band had decided before the tour began that the drum solo was Neil Peart's moment. It would remain his, permanently. Nilles played YYZ the way it was meant to be played, as a full band tour de force, and left the space that had always belonged to Peart exactly as they had found it. And then Tom Sawyer, the song that may be the single most scrutinized 2 minutes of drumming in the history of rock music, given how many people have attempted it and how exacting the standard is. During its iconic drum section, Nilles executed the fills that Rush fans have had memorized for 40 years, and she did it with something nobody expected: a massive smile on her face. The crowd rose to its feet. The morning after the show, the reviews rolled in from every major music publication, and they were telling not just in their praise, but in their specific language. Rolling Stone called her playing a mix of precision and snare-snapping brutality that felt more reminiscent of Peart's All the World's a Stage era, his most physically aggressive period. They noted that she didn't always replicate Peart's parts to microscopic precision, specifically highlighting subdivisions where she subtly reinvented the drum part with her own feel, but that she evoked his essence throughout. That distinction, not imitation, but essence, is the most important phrase in any of the reviews. It is what Lee and Lifeson had said they wanted. It is what Nilles had described as her own goal when she spoke about approaching his music with respect and sensitivity. And it is what the audience at the Kia Forum felt when they heard it. Not a copy, the real thing, and a new voice. The News Tribune called her the reason why any of this is happening, and noted that she supplied the heartbeat and muscle and most of the nuance of the most technically demanding setlist in rock music. One reviewer added pointedly, "I would have liked to see Nilles take a bow, flanked by Lee and Lifeson. Maybe after a bit, she can drop the deference." And the Modern Drummer review, perhaps the most significant verdict from the publication that Neil Peart had graced on the cover 10 times, closed with a sentence that brought everything full circle. Rush may be on to one of its most significant chapters, the one that extends beyond them, in which their music will bond generations and even transcend death. I keep coming back to that stick drop. In isolation, it's a small thing, a fraction of a second in a 2.5-hour show. A physical accident that happens to every drummer at some point in their career. Unremarkable, except for the timing. But the timing was everything. First psalm, first note, the most pressure-loaded debut in modern rock history. 15,000 people holding their collective breath. Neil Peart sticks on the riser beside her kit. She dropped a stick, and before the note where it should have landed could pass, she had the replacement in her hand and the fill was completed and the beat was found and Rush was moving forward. That is not a metaphor I'm reaching for. That is what actually happened. And it is, in its own strange way, the most accurate possible summary of what Anika Nilles has been doing since the moment she first sat down behind a kit in a rehearsal room in Canada and Geddy Lee looked at Alex Lifeson and said, "We have a real problem now." Something unexpected happened, and before anyone could fully process what it was, she had already handled it. The tour runs through April 2027. If you were at the Kia Forum on June 7th, or if you've watched any of the footage, drop your reaction in the comments. Which moment hit you hardest? Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.